The aliens laughed, a chorus of guttural and hissing tones that echoed across the bridge of their flagship as the images of the human fleet filled their displays. To them, it was comedy, a parade of rusting hulks, their armor scarred with age, their hulls bearing the marks of centuries gone by. The translation software rendered their sneers with brutal clarity. Relics, one alien commander declared. Floating coffins, another chuckled. Their derision spread like wildfire through the ranks, their confidence so absolute that they had already envisioned the conquest of yet another defenseless species. On the human side, the laughter was not heard directly, but its sentiment was well known. Reports carried the disdain clearly enough. The United Earth Command had no choice but to pull the Relic fleet from its long dormancy. With the core systems weakened by decades of complacency and stripped of modern warships in exchange for fragile treaties, these old giants were all that remained. They had once been the pride of humanity's golden age of warfaring, steel-boned colossi that had guarded the stars. Now they were rusted, patched, barely functional, yet they were all humanity had left. Admiral Marcus Hale stood silently on the command deck of the Iron Veiler, the flagship of the resurrected fleet. Age had carved lines deep into his face, and his grizzled beard was streaked with white, but his posture remained unyielding. The men who served under him had no doubts about his resolve. He had commanded in the days when the fleet was still new, when humanity still believed it could dominate the stars. In many ways, he was as much a relic as the ships themselves, a man pulled from the shadows of history to wage one last desperate war. Beside him, Captain Elias Ward adjusted the tactical display, eyes sharp and calculating. Ward was younger, a product of the generation that had inherited the ashes of a fallen military tradition. He had studied the old tactics, memorized maneuvers from outdated manuals, and learned from the last few veterans still breathing. Where Hale carried instinct and memory, Ward carried analysis and precision. He did not waste words. He observed, considered, and when he spoke, his voice cut through like steel. At the lower stations, Lieutenant Jonah Reyes worked feverishly, his hands moving across the aging interface with practiced energy. Barely 30, he was the youngest officer on the Iron Veiler's bridge, and perhaps the most passionate. Where others saw ruin and decay, Reyes saw history, saw potential. He had grown up reading accounts of the great battles, of how humanity had once refused to bow to any foe. The relics were not symbols of weakness to him, they were testaments of endurance. Their formation is scattered, Ward remarked, eyes never leaving the alien display. They are not taking us seriously. They're more concerned with posturing than with strategy. They think we're already beaten, Reyes added quickly. His tone was not fear but indignation, as if the very idea of underestimation insulted him personally. Hale did not turn his gaze from the viewport. Outside, the fleet drifted in silence. Dozens of massive ships floated in darkened slumber, their hulls lined with scars of forgotten wars. Some were missing panels, others had half-functional weapons arrays, and all bore the unmistakable signs of long neglect. Yet, in their stillness, there was an aura of quiet menace, like ancient beasts sleeping before the hunt. "Let them laugh," Hale said at last, his voice a low growl that silenced the bridge. "They see rust. They see weakness. They don't see men willing to bleed to keep these stars. That will be their mistake." The bridge crew exchanged glances, tension mixed with resolve. These were not men fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting because if they failed, Earth itself would burn. The aliens had already reduced 3 colonies to ash, their population centers glassed without hesitation. Humanity's allies had fallen silent, unwilling to provoke the conquerors. The old warships were all that remained between survival and extinction. Orders rippled across the fleet. Engineers cursed at failing power conduits, technicians hammered at consoles that sparked and sputtered, and crews sweated in machine halls where ancient reactors groaned back to life. The fleet's awakening was no elegant procession. It was a struggle of men against time, against entropy, against despair. Reyes reported the numbers with grim determination. "Half of the secondary batteries are operational, Admiral. We've got maybe 60% engine capacity across the line. Shield harmonics are unstable." He paused, then added with a faint smile, "But she'll fly." Ward's eyes flicked toward him. "She'll fly, yes. The question is whether she'll survive the first volley. Survival isn't the point, Hale cut in. His gaze was still locked on the stars ahead, where the alien armada glittered like a swarm of predators circling their prey. Our ancestors didn't build these ships to survive. They built them to kill. A silence followed, heavy with the weight of what was to come. Every man on that bridge understood that the odds were hopeless. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and their ships were older than most of their crew's grandparents. But none of them voiced the doubt. To speak it aloud would be to betray the one weapon they still had, resolve. Beyond the viewport, the alien fleet shifted into position, their weapons arrays gleaming with cold light. Messages came through, translated into bitter taunts. Humans cling to their rust. How quaint. You will die in silence, as your relics crumble. Reyes muttered under his breath, almost too low to hear, let them come. Ward's hands tightened on the console. Hale finally turned from the stars to face his officers, his voice steady, calm, absolute. They believe we are relics. They believe these ships are coffins. But tomorrow, when fire lights the sky, they will learn the truth. These are not relics. These are the last lions of Earth. The words settled over the crew like steel plating, bracing them against the storm ahead. No laughter from the aliens could reach them now. The engines stirred faintly, a vibration humming through the deck, the first heartbeat of the Iron Valus awakening. In the silence that followed, the war felt inevitable. The aliens would advance, confident and unprepared for the fury of men who had nothing left to lose. And the relic fleet, scorned by all, would rise to meet them, teeth bared, claws ready. The laughter in the stars was still ringing when the first engines roared. Engines that had not stirred for centuries shuddered awake, their deep vibrations rolling through the decks like the growl of leviathans long thought dead. The Iron Valus reactor groaned, coughed sparks, and then thundered into steady life, bathing her corridors in pale blue light. Across the fleet, one by one, relic warships lit their cores, a constellation of ancient steel reborn in the darkness. Where silence had once been, the void now trembled with the guttural roar of awakening giants. On the bridge, Lieutenant Jonah Reyes could barely contain his grin as status reports scrolled across his screen. Power levels stabilizing on all primary engines, he announced, his voice pitched with pride. Iron Valor is fully mobile. And Admiral, you'll want to hear this, the Resolute has also gone live. She's holding steady at 87% capacity. Admiral Marcus Hale allowed himself only the faintest nod. His weathered face betrayed no joy, only grim satisfaction. He had been unsure whether the relics could still breathe fire, but now he knew they would. Signal the fleet, he said evenly. No turning back now. Every man knows his place. We stand. Captain Elias Ward studied the tactical hologram as human ships shuffled into their assigned positions. The alien armada had already begun to respond, shifting into a lazy crescent, their formation loose, almost mocking. Ward's jaw tightened. They're not even aligning for battle, he observed. They expect this to be a slaughter, not a fight. Reyes turned sharply toward him. Let them think that. The harder they laugh now, the harder they'll choke when we hit back. The bridge crew chuckled softly at his words, not because the situation was humorous, but because courage, especially when reckless, was infectious. They needed that spark, that reminder of why they were here. For all their rust and fragility, they were men of flesh and willpower, not algorithms and arrogance. Outside the viewport, the alien fleet began its approach. Their ships gleamed with sleek alloys and flawless engineering, every line curved with clinical precision. Compared to them, humanity's vessels looked crude, brutal, armored slabs of steel bristling with cannons that belonged in a museum. The contrast was obscene, like knights in dented plate armor facing off against machines of divine craftsmanship. Ward's eyes swept the displays, calculating distances and trajectories. Once they open fire, our shields won't hold. We'll need to absorb the first volley on hull. Position the Valor and the Resolute at the vanguard. Spread the lighter cruisers to the flanks, reinforce the line. And prepare boarding detachments. If we can't outgun them, we'll bleed them up close. Old doctrine, Reyes said with a grin. Hammerhead formation. Hale turned to him, his voice grave. It's not just a maneuver, Lieutenant. It's a promise. We break through or we burn. No hesitation. The comms officer cut in, voice clipped. Incoming transmission from the alien flagship. Visual request. Put it through, Hale ordered. The screen flickered to reveal a towering alien commander, his elongated skull marked with ceremonial ridges, his eyes slitted with cruel amusement. His translated words dripped contempt. Humans, we offered you mercy. You chose rusted corpses instead of surrender. When your relics crumble, remember you did this to yourselves. Hale's gaze did not waver. When you remember this day, remember that you mocked lions because they looked old. Then remember how they tore out your throat. He cut the transmission with a gesture. Weapons ready. The alien fleet fired first. Streams of white-hot energy lanced across the void, smashing into human shields and tearing them apart in blinding flashes. Warning klaxons filled the iron veiler as sparks cascaded from overloaded panels. Reyes fought to stabilize the systems, his fingers flying. Shields collapsing, switching to hull integrity monitoring. The ship shuddered violently as plasma blasts carved glowing scars across her armor. But where the aliens expected to see their beams melt through, they met something else: solid steel, forged in an era when ships were built to take punishment, not avoid it. The Veiler groaned but did not fall. Across the fleet, relics held their ground, battered but alive. Ward's voice was sharp. Return fire. Concentrated barrage on their forward destroyers. Make them feel us. The old cannons opened up, spitting incandescent bolts of tungsten and uranium slugs accelerated by magnetic rails. The sound reverberated through the hull like thunder. To the aliens, it must have seemed primitive, even laughable. But their laughter faltered when one of their destroyers erupted in flame, its hull breached by sheer brute force. The kinetic barrage tore through advanced alloys as if they were paper, splitting the ship apart. On the bridge, Reyes let out a sharp cheer. Direct hit. Ward didn't smile. That's one. Don't think they'll fall so easily. The aliens, enraged, closed ranks and surged forward. Their weapons unleashed another devastating volley, tearing chunks from the hulls of several human cruisers. One frigate, the Ardent Flame, disintegrated under the barrage, her explosion scattering debris across the formation. The loss sent a heavy silence across the comms, but Hale's voice cut through like iron. Stay the line. Every man here knew what this meant. Keep fighting. The hammerhead formation tightened. The Veiler and the Resolute pushed forward, absorbing the brunt of alien fire while the smaller ships flanked. The plan was brutal, costly, but it drew the enemy into range where human unpredictability could matter. Ward's mind raced, tracking patterns. Alien fleets relied on perfect coordination, machine precision. Human fleets thrived on chaos. Bring us closer, Ward ordered. Make them chase us into their own blind spots. The Iron Veiler surged ahead, her cannons roaring with every salvo. The Resolute followed, matching her flagship's charge. Alien fire raked across their hulls, tearing steel, but the relics pressed on, closing the gap. At knife-fight range, the differences between sleek perfection and brutal design meant little. It was tooth against tooth, claw against claw. Then Hale gave the order that shifted the course of the engagement. Veiler, full burn. Prepare to ram. Gasps erupted from the crew, but none voiced dissent. This was how relics fought, not with elegance, but with fury. The Veiler barreled forward, colliding with an alien dreadnought in a thunderous crash that shook every man aboard. Armor crumpled, hulls screamed, and metal tore like flesh. The alien ship split down its spine, flames bursting from its fractured core. Reyes, clinging to his station, shouted over the alarms, "We did it. She's breaking apart." But Hale's eyes were cold. One ship for another. Balance paid. We're not finished. The alien fleet recoiled in shock, their perfect formations faltering. They had expected relics to crumble. Instead, they had seen one of their own giants reduced to wreckage by the sheer savagery of human steel. Ward leaned close to Hale, his voice low, urgent. They'll adapt quickly. Their pride won't allow them to retreat. We need to press the chaos before they recover. Hale nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the enemy. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. For the first time, the aliens were no longer laughing. The Iron Veil's deck still trembled, its hull bleeding sparks into the void, but her engines roared louder now, as if feeding on defiance itself. Around her, the Relic fleet rallied, their battered frames alight with firepower, their crews burning with the knowledge that they had drawn alien blood. And somewhere deep within every man on the bridge, a realization took root. This was no longer about survival alone. This was about proving to the galaxy that humanity, relics or not, could still make the stars tremble. Smoke clung to the corridors of the Iron Veil, acrid and metallic, every breath reminding the crew that survival was being purchased second by second. The great ship groaned as though protesting her resurrection, yet she pressed on, her engines growling and her cannons still thundering. Across the void, alien formations staggered, forced to reorganize after the shocking loss of one of their dreadnoughts. For the first time, hesitation showed in their maneuvers. On the bridge, Admiral Marcus Hale stood rigid, his eyes locked on the tactical display. "They're recalibrating," Captain Elias Ward said, voice clipped, his hands gliding over the controls. "The shock is fading. Their algorithms are adjusting to our patterns." Hale's gaze hardened. "Then we don't give them patterns." Lieutenant Jonah Reyes, sweat glistening on his brow, leaned forward. "Admiral, the crews are pushing their limits. Hull integrity on the flankships is down to 40%. If we press too close, they'll break," Hale interrupted, his voice steady but merciless. "So will we. The only question is who breaks first." Ward's fingers froze on the console. He turned sharply. "We can't just trade blows until nothing's left. We need to unbalance them, pull them into the kind of fight their systems can't manage." Reyes caught his meaning instantly. Boarding. A dangerous silence hung over the bridge. Boarding alien ships was madness, primitive, brutal, and lethal. But it was also something no alien war doctrine had prepared for. Their reliance on precision and distance combat left them vulnerable in close quarters. Hale's expression did not change, but his silence was permission. Ward nodded grimly. "Prepare detachments. Target their nearest cruiser. If we can take it, we rip a hole in their line." The orders went out, and within minutes, boarding shuttles broke from the Relic fleet, streaking across the battlefield under withering fire. Reyes volunteered to lead one of the first squads, strapping on battered armor as alarms echoed around him. His men were silent, their faces pale, but their eyes burned with the same defiance that had carried them this far. The shuttle slammed into the alien cruiser's hull, its breaching charges cutting molten lines through pristine alloy. With a shudder, the hull split open, and Reyes's men surged inside, weapons blazing. The corridors were sleek, sterile, and eerily quiet until alien defenders poured forth, their forms swift and angular, their weapons singing with deadly precision. Reyes bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Forward. Make every step count." What followed was carnage. The aliens were faster, their weapons more advanced, but the humans fought like cornered wolves, every strike a desperate act of survival. Reyes fired until his weapon burned hot, then ripped a blade from a fallen foe and swung it with raw fury. Blood, both human and alien, slicked the floor, the clash echoing like thunder in the narrow corridors. On the bridge of the Veil, Hale and Ward monitored the assault through fractured comms. Screams, gunfire, and static painted the brutal reality. Ward's jaw clenched. "They're taking losses, heavy ones. We can't sustain this." "They don't need to sustain it," Hale replied quietly. His eyes never left the display. "They just need to show the enemy we will crawl into their ships and tear them apart with our bare hands if we must." Minutes dragged into hours, though in truth, less than 20 passed. Reyes's squad hacked their way through the cruiser, forcing the aliens into retreat. By the time they reached the core, half the squad was dead, their bodies sprawled in the sterile halls. Reyes himself was bleeding from a wound in his side, his armor scorched and broken, but he stood firm as he slammed charges onto the reactor housing. "This ship burns with us or without us," he growled into the comm, his voice ragged but triumphant. The explosion tore through the alien cruiser, fire and debris scattering into the void. Reyes's shuttle barely escaped, limping back to the Vela, trailing smoke. When he staggered onto the bridge, pale and trembling, Hale simply nodded at him. No words were needed. His men had done the impossible, and all of them knew it. But victory carried its price. Ward surveyed the wreckage of humanity's line. We've lost 4 cruisers, 2 frigates, and half of the boarding detachments. The fleet is bleeding out. Look at them, Hale countered. His hand rose to the viewport, where the alien ships hovered uncertainly, their formations broken. For the first time, they fear us. They've never fought anything like this. The alien command, humiliated, responded with ferocity. Their capital ships surged forward, firing in disciplined volleys meant to erase the Relic fleet in one crushing blow. Human ships answered with fire of their own, the void alight with the fury of 2 civilizations colliding. One by one, the Relics fell. The Defiance, split in half by concentrated beams. The Noble Heart, consumed in flames after a reactor breach. Yet each ship bought precious seconds, their crews choosing death over retreat, forcing the aliens to pay for every inch of ground with blood and metal. Ward's calm cracked as another frigate vanished in fire. We can't outlast this. Every second we stay here, we lose more men. There has to be another way. There is, Hale said, his tone like stone. He keyed the fleet-wide channel, his voice carrying to every man still alive. Brothers of Earth, they thought us weak. They thought us relics. Show them our will. Every gun, every engine, every soul, drive them back or die standing. The fleet answered with a unified roar, their comms erupting in defiant cries. The battered warships surged forward again, engines blazing, cannons spitting fire until their barrels overheated. The aliens were forced to yield ground, step by step, their perfect lines collapsing under the relentless human assault. In the midst of the chaos, Ward leaned close to Hale, his voice low. You're burning the fleet alive. Hale's eyes flicked toward him. Better burned with honor than left to rust in shame. The words silenced Ward, though his jaw tightened. He knew the Admiral was right. This was not strategy anymore, it was legacy. Humanity's place in the galaxy was being written here, in fire and ruin. When the alien flagship finally entered the fray, its colossal silhouette blotting out the stars, a hush fell over every human ship. It was a leviathan, bristling with weapons, flawless in construction. Even the most defiant hearts wavered at the sight. Reyes, swaying on his feet but unbroken, whispered hoarsely, "Then we take it down." The alien flagship loomed closer, its weapons charging, preparing to erase the remnants of the Relic fleet in a single stroke. Humanity had blooded their enemy, but the storm was only beginning. And as the Iron Vela turned her scarred hull to face the giant, her engines flaring brighter than ever, every man aboard understood, the next clash would decide not just the battle, but the fate of their species. The alien flagship dominated the void, a monstrous silhouette that swallowed the stars, bristling with weapons that glowed like the molten veins of some cosmic titan. Its arrival cast a pall over the battered human fleet. The relics floated like wounded beasts around the Iron Vela, their hulls blackened, their crews exhausted, yet every man still at his station, unwilling to yield. Silence gripped the bridge for a long moment as the enormity of the enemy loomed before them. Admiral Marcus Hale stood with his hands clasped behind his back, shoulders squared despite the smoke curling through the Velas bridge. His eyes were steady, as if the Leviathan before them was nothing more than another obstacle to be endured. "There it is," he said, his voice low but resonant, carrying to every corner of the deck. "The beast that believes itself our executioner." Captain Elias Ward studied the tactical display, his face pale in its glow. "Its weapons arrays outclass anything we've faced. Shields stronger, hull thicker. A single volley could gut us. We cannot win in direct engagement." Lieutenant Jonah Reyes, leaning heavily against his console, blood seeping through the bandage at his side, raised his head. His voice, though ragged, held a defiance that refused to break. "Then we don't fight them the way they expect. We drag that monster into a grave of our choosing." Hale turned toward him, a faint glimmer in his weathered eyes. The old admiral had seen countless battles, but it was the young who spoke the words that mattered most now. "Explain," Hale commanded. Reyes straightened, wincing with every movement. The dying star in this system, it's unstable, its gravity well erratic. If we can lure the flagship close enough, its mass will tear at their hull, distort their shields. We make the star our weapon. Ward's expression tightened. It's suicide. Our ships can't withstand those forces either. Whoever leads the charge will not return. The weight of his words hung heavy, but Hale's face betrayed no hesitation. He stepped closer to the viewport, his gaze locked on the alien flagship as though daring it to blink first. Then the Iron Veiler will lead. Better to burn in the heart of a star than rust in silence. Reyes shook his head sharply, his pain forgotten. Admiral, you can't. I must, Hale cut in. His tone was not cruel, but final. These men need a symbol, and symbols do not flee from destiny. I have carried this fleet across decades. It is right that I should carry it into its last charge. Ward's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with conflict. He wanted to argue, to demand another solution, but he knew the Admiral was beyond persuasion. Instead, he forced his focus back to the fleet. Then we make it count. Every remaining ship forms on the Veiler. We strike as one. No hesitation. The orders spread through the comms, and the Relic fleet stirred once more. Engines that had no right to function still roared. Weapons that had fired more rounds in this battle than in their prime years crackled with defiance. Men who had watched friends burn still gripped their stations with iron resolve. The last lions of Earth gathered for a final hunt. The aliens, sensing defiance instead of despair, advanced eagerly, their flagship surging ahead like a predator ready for the kill. Its weapons fired in searing volleys, tearing through 2 human frigates instantly, scattering wreckage like ash. Yet the relics did not scatter. They tightened formation, the Iron Veiler at their spearpoint, her hull shuddering with every strike but refusing to falter. On the bridge, Hale raised his hand. All ships, forward thrust. We drive them into the well. His voice rang through every comm, every cabin, every soul still alive. This is the hour that will be remembered. Make it one worthy of men. The Veiler surged ahead, her engines straining, her frame trembling as though the ship herself knew the end was near. Reyes stood beside the Admiral, refusing to leave, his young face set with stubborn fire. If you're going down, sir, I'll be damned if I'm not beside you. Hale regarded him for a long moment. There was no time for speeches, but a flicker of pride softened his harsh features. Then let history write that we charged together. The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Railguns spat molten metal. Plasma cannons screamed until their barrels melted. Torpedoes carved burning trails through the void. The alien flagship's shields flared, bending but not breaking under the onslaught. It answered with annihilating blasts, scouring human ships from existence one after another. The defiant Rose went silent. The Oathkeeper broke apart. Still, the relics pressed forward, claws sinking deeper, refusing to let go. The dying star loomed closer now, its crimson light swelling, waves of gravity distorting the void. Warning sirens screamed aboard every ship as systems buckled under the pull. But the Veiler did not slow. She drove ahead, fire streaming from her hull, her decks groaning under the strain. Ward's voice cut through the chaos. We're at critical range. If we don't break off now, we're lost. Hale's answer was calm. Then we are lost. But so are they. The alien flagship, its arrogance unshaken, pursued relentlessly, certain of victory. It did not see the trap until it was too late, until the star's gravity began to pull at its hull, dragging at its perfect symmetry. Its shields warped, energy bleeding into distortion. The Leviathan faltered for the first time. Hale gave the final order, his voice resonant, unyielding. Ramming speed. All power to engines. The Iron Veiler howled as her engines unleashed their last reserves. She surged forward, a scarred spear of steel, and slammed into the alien flagship with a collision that shook the heavens. The impact tore through both vessels, ripping metal and flesh alike. Fire consumed the bridge, consoles exploding, men thrown like rag dolls. Through the smoke, Hale stood tall until the flames took him, his final breath lost in the roar of his ship's sacrifice. The alien flagship shuddered, twisted, and then began its descent into the star. Its crew screamed as their ship was torn apart, dragged into the inferno. The Leviathan that had once seemed immortal was reduced to debris, swallowed whole by the burning heart of the system. The remaining relics, battered and broken, pulled back from the brink of the gravity well. Ward coordinated their retreat with brutal efficiency, his voice carrying steady command despite the grief heavy in his chest. Reyes, barely conscious, was dragged from the Valus wreckage by a shuttle before she was claimed by the star. He awoke to silence, surrounded by men who had lost everything yet stood victorious. The field of battle was a graveyard. Human ships floated in ruin, their numbers halved again. Yet the alien fleet was shattered, their flagship destroyed, their arrogance burned to ash. For the first time in memory, humanity had not merely survived, it had triumphed. Ward stood in the command chair of the Resolute, the new flagship by necessity rather than honor. His voice carried to the survivors across the fleet. We have bled. We have burned. But we have not broken. Let the galaxy remember, these relics roared louder than any weapon. And so long as one ship still sails, humanity will never kneel. Reyes, slumped but alive, whispered to himself as the comms filled with cheers, his eyes burning with both sorrow and pride. They thought we were relics. What they faced was humanity. The wreckage drifted silently around them, a monument to sacrifice and defiance. Though Hale had fallen, his spirit lingered in every man who drew breath. The aliens had laughed at relics. Now they would never laugh again.